Barry Gibb has spent 60 years on stage. But for 50 of those years, the most important story was never the one playing out under the lights. It was happening at home, behind closed doors, far from the crowds. For decades, people whisper about his wife, Linda, about what she did to protect him, about the rumor that she once forced him to choose between the band and his marriage. Now, at 79, after burying all three of his brothers, Barry has finally spoken. And what he said about Linda is not what anyone expected. Barry Gibb was born on September 1st, 1946, in Douglas on the Isle of Man. From the very beginning, his life was marked by movement rather than stillness. His father, Hugh Gibb, was a drummer, so music was already woven into the fabric of the home. But what shaped Barry just as deeply was a feeling that nothing ever stayed settled for long. Even his middle name, Crompton, carried a quiet family pride through a link to the inventor Samuel Crompton. Still, pride did not mean comfort. This was not the kind of childhood that felt secure or peaceful. It was restless, uncertain, and always shifting. That instability left something lasting inside him, an early understanding that life could change without warning, and that you had better be ready when it did. Before the family finally settled in Manchester in 1953, life already felt scattered. School never became a place where Barry belonged. In fact, he hated it so much that he and his friends reportedly skipped for nearly an entire year. That detail says a lot about who he was. Even as a boy, he was not built for stillness. He needed movement, noise, and some kind of escape. What looked like misbehavior on the surface was also the early shape of something far bigger. The same restless energy that made school feel impossible would later pour straight into music and songwriting. Once it found the right place to go, it became something powerful. By 1955, Barry was not just singing for fun. Music had already begun turning into a real family path. He formed the Rattlesnakes with his brothers Robin and Maurice, and together they played skiffle-style covers inspired by artists like Cliff Richard and the Everly Brothers. Then came a moment that now feels almost unbelievable. On December 28, 1957, they gave their first professional performance. Barry was still just a boy, yet he was already standing in front of paying crowds. That kind of beginning changes a person. Long before most future stars even understand what performing means, Barry was already learning how to hold a room and make people stay with him. In 1958, life shifted again, and this time the move was enormous. The Gibb family left for Australia, settling in Redcliffe, Queensland, near Brisbane. That change ended up reshaping Barry's entire future. Nothing was handed to them there. This was not the beginning of easy fame. It was a period of hustle, pressure, and survival through performance. The identity that would later become the Bee Gees truly started taking shape in Australia, where the brothers sang in local venues, and even performed at speedway events. One of the most striking details from that time is that they sometimes sang from the back of a truck for crowds who had not even come to hear music. That kind of setting can break people or sharpen them. For Barry and his brothers, it sharpened them. Even while music was beginning to give Barry direction, his personal life showed how badly he also wanted stability. In 1966, while still very young, he married Maureen Bates. On the surface, it might seem like a small early detail, but it says a great deal about where his mind was after years of movement and pressure. Marriage may have felt like a way to finally pin life down and make it stay in place, but it did not bring the peace he hoped for. The marriage caused distress for both of them, and before long they separated. What makes this part of the story important is not just the breakup itself, but what the breakup reveals. Barry was not only chasing fame, he was also chasing something steady, something safe, something that would hold. Then came 1967, and everything started moving faster. The Bee Gees returned to England carrying little more than demo tapes and a fierce belief that they could make it. Their father had already been sending those tapes around, and when Robert Stigwood heard the material, he decided to take a chance on them. What happened next felt almost unreal. Their song, New York Mining Disaster 1941, sounded so close in mood and style to the Beatles that some DJs thought it was a secret Beatles record. That confusion gave the Bee Gees instant attention and made them seem bigger than they actually were at that moment. One lucky break changed the temperature around them entirely, and suddenly the rise no longer felt slow. It felt explosive. Right in the middle of that rise, Barry met Linda Gray. They met in 1967 on the set of Top of the Pops, at the exact moment when the Bee Gees were climbing fast and Barry's public image was becoming stronger by the week. That timing matters because Linda did not meet him as some unknown dreamer waiting to be discovered. She met him when the world was just beginning to turn its eyes toward him. She had been Miss Edinburgh, which meant she already knew how to stand in front of people, how to carry herself, and how to handle attention. So when Barry noticed her, he was not just seeing beauty. He was meeting someone who already knew how to own a room. Barry later said they saw each other across the room, and something happened. Linda remembered Barry coming over and asking her out for tea. It sounds so ordinary when said that way, and maybe that is why it feels real. Big love stories often begin with something small and simple. There's even a story that they shared a private moment inside a doctor who tarred his prop on the set, a future music legend and a beauty queen hiding inside a television prop, like two young people caught in their own world. That detail gives their early relationship warmth. It makes it feel playful, sudden, and deeply human. Barry's divorce from Morin was finalized in July 1970. Just 6 weeks later, on September 1st, 1970, his 24th birthday, he married Linda Gray. That timeline feels almost shocking when you first hear it, because it shows how clear his heart already was. This was not drifting. This was not confusion. He knew exactly where he wanted his life to go. After their marriage, Linda stepped away from public life entirely and focused on building a stable home and raising their 5 children: Stephen, Ashley, Travis, Michael, and Alexandra. That choice says more than people sometimes realize. She could have continued chasing visibility in her own right, but instead she chose privacy, family structure, and calm. In the world Barry lived in, that kind of quiet strength mattered enormously. The music world around the Bee Gees could be loud, unstable, and full of excess. But inside their home, Linda created a very different environment. Barry himself admitted that the group often relied on pills and drinks simply to keep functioning. He later credited Linda with stopping that pattern from taking over his life entirely. One of the strongest details he shared was that she would not allow drugs to remain in the house. If anything came through the door, it would end up down the toilet. That one detail says everything. It shows that Linda did not wait for a disaster and then react. She acted in the moment, again and again, refusing to let his life drift in the same direction that had already damaged his brothers. Her power was not loud. It was practical. She did not just stand by Barry. She made it harder for him to fall. When Saturday Night Fever exploded, it did not simply become a successful film. It turned the Bee Gees into a worldwide force. The soundtrack was reportedly selling close to 1 million copies a week at its height. Barry later said there was a period when songs written by the Bee Gees were dominating the American charts all at once, the kind of thing that almost never happens. Yet behind all of that polish and harmony was pressure, exhaustion, and almost obsessive drive to keep producing. Barry openly admitted that some of those songs were written while using amphetamines. What the public heard as smooth and effortless was often being created inside a much harsher reality. Then the backlash came. In 1979, Disco Demolition Night turned disco into a target, and the Bee Gees became the face of that backlash, even though they had not created the anger behind it. Radio stations began pulling their songs. Music that had been everywhere suddenly felt unwelcome. For Barry, Saturday Night Fever had done 2 things at once. It made him huge, and it boxed him in. The very thing that made him a superstar also made him easier to attack later. When the music world turned cold, Linda became even more important than before. Then came loss, repeated, devastating, and personal. Andy Gibb died in 1988 at just 30 years old, his body weakened by years of cocaine abuse. Maurice died suddenly in 2003 during emergency surgery at only 53. Robin followed in 2012 after a slow, painful decline from cancer. With each death, Barry became more alone as the last surviving brother, carrying the entire family story on his own shoulders. Through every one of those losses, Linda stayed beside him, not just for the public moments people remember, but through the funerals, the hospital days, and the broken family aftermath. Barry credited her with helping him stay upright when everything else was falling apart. In 2018, Barry walked out of Buckingham Palace after being knighted and admitted he nearly fell over. He was overwhelmed, and he made no effort to hide it. But the bigger story was not the title. It was who stood beside him. Linda Gray was there, along with her children, while Barry dedicated the honor to his dead brothers. A year earlier, at Glastonbury, Barry had publicly dedicated a performance to Linda. For a man who spent so much of his life protecting his private world, that kind of acknowledgement carried real weight. It told the crowd that Linda was not some distant figure hidden behind the legend. She was part of the reason the legend was still standing. Barry and Linda celebrated 55 years of marriage in September 2025. Together they raised 5 children and welcomed 7 grandchildren, all while quietly building a private life strong enough to survive the chaos around it. Barry once explained it simply. Linda never wanted to be famous. She wanted to be Linda. That may be one of the deepest reasons their marriage worked. The real story of Barry Gibb is not just about Saturday Night Fever, or the Bee Gees selling more than 220 million records, or surviving crushing backlash and terrible loss. It is about a man who touched the highest level of fame and chose, in the end, to measure his life by the family he built away from the spotlight. And at the center of that family, steady and immovable for over 5 decades, was Linda Gray, the woman who never let the house become part of the chaos, who drew a line and never moved it, and who quietly saved the last BG from becoming another casualty of the world that made him famous.